This is the Eye for an Eye channel. Welcome to today's show. You may remember in the past, probably a lot of you don't, because I don't know if anybody's been around my channel that long, but I used to cover the Mandela effect here and there and some of the things revolving around the Mandela effect. And my views on the Mandela effect have evolved over the years. I know a lot of people immediately jumped in and believed the Mandela effect, but I was trying to sit back and watch how the Mandela effect evolved in pop culture and our society to see if it was a psychological operation or not, or if it was in fact a cover for something else. Now, if you don't know what the Mandela effect is supposed to be, the Mandela effect is a false memory of things from the past. You know, a lot of people obviously go deep into detail about the Mandela effect with Bible misinterpretations versus is the Bible being altered or changed. Things like the Berenstain Bears and the Bernstein Bears. There's a lot of things that people have picked up on over the years. Even recently, I've heard people talk about stovetop stuffing, saying that it was always Stouffer's stovetop stuffing and now it's Kraft stovetop stuffing. These are things that you could all sit and think about and kind of go crazy over in a sense, but there is some truth to this because there's a lot of truth to memory loss and mental health problems in our society. Now, we could also look at the mental health problem as something that they're gaslighting and making people obviously have these really crazy thoughts and ideas. I feel like they're making a society of mass murderers with a lot of the programming they're putting out there, and I'll go into that in deeper detail. And what I mean by that, of course, is seeing a lot of these crimes that are committed and the way that people are committing crimes now with dismembering people. These are things that you would only hear from the craziest of types of serial killers in the past. It's becoming a normal thing with crimes that are being committed where people are just dismembering their loved ones, etc., like it's nothing. It's very insane what they've done to our society, all through psychological operations and mind control. So with the Mandela effect, I think it's very important to note that while you could go deep into detail about things and how they've changed, and a lot of people out there believe that the Mandela effect is a kind of an ultra-parallel universe happening at once, which of course could go back to CERN and what they're doing with this CERN machine that they never really identify what they're doing. They just go, yeah, we're smashing particles together. Yeah, we want to open the abyss. We want to open a black hole, right? And we've seen, of course, even at CERN, them using the Mandela effect in some of their commercials over the years where they've had, you know, guys holding up signs that say Mandela. So there's a lot to the Mandela effect. And I want to talk about another side of the Mandela effect that you don't hear people talking about. But before I get into that and what I think is going on with the Mandela effect, I also want to bring up the fact that CNN, BuzzFeed, Forbes are all pumping out article after article after article about the Mandela effect. So when they start addressing these things, it tells you that they want you to obviously believe what they want you to believe. So this false memory thing that's going on, they want you to say, oh, well, what do you think this is? And they say, scientists can't explain it. Oh, was this really the title of this book? Was this really the line in the movie? And really what we should all be focusing on is what has changed in our reality as far as what type of technology has become enhanced over the last decade or so much so that it would have an effect on your brain. And I think if you start connecting the dots, you could see where I'm going here. But I want to start by even showing you how the Mandela effect has been brought up in pop culture. Things like the X-Files have brought up the Mandela effect over and over again. So they want this out there for a reason because it's actually something that people are experiencing. So they want to be able to discredit it and they want to be able to point a finger in this direction or that direction. In this case with the Mandela effect, they kind of point a finger at a boogeyman. They bring attention to it on CNN. They bring attention to it in Forbes and all these other places. They bring attention to it on the X-Files. But they kind of want it to still be this lingering mystery conspiracy where you're questioning your own mind about things that you've heard in the past and is it real or is it not? But here's a clip from the X-Files from the past that they've covered or when they covered the Mandela effect.
For the simple reasons that Orwell said, he who controls the past controls the future. The ability to manipulate memory creates unlimited power. Political, economical, cultural, runs the gamut from Holocaust denial to corporate product recognition. There are companies who are willing to pay anything, do anything, to have people forget that their products explode on impact or suddenly catch fire. Companies like G spending billions in profit to repress these memories. The only thing I haven't been able to do is to figure out how they're doing it.
They can't. I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. I mean, the Mandela effect is
It's the Mandela effect, guys. It's the Mandela effect. Just say it.
Is simply people misremembering stuff.
Maybe this is actually evidence of a parallel universe.
Wait, what?
So maybe these differences in collective memories are actually evidence of our universe somehow becoming intertwined with another, if not identical, then very similar universe. So people's memories are correct. They're just remembering something that happened in another dimension. Hence the discrepancies. That's science, Scott.
All life-questioning revelations that came to me while I was moving. Not myself, but my mother. And when unpacking her stuff, I came across a bunch of old things of mine she kept. Remembering my mom reading Dr. Wiesel books to me is one of the fondest memories I have. But when I looked more closely at the book's cover, well, that's when the Wuzel blooper gloves really hit the fan. What? Because Dr. Wiesel's name was spelled different than how I remembered, not with 2 S's, but with 2 Z's. What's happening?
It's a Mandela effect.
The what effect?
The Mandela effect, when someone has a memory that doesn't coincide with everybody else's or the facts. So named because some people have a memory of hearing that Nelson Mandela died in the 80s while in prison, when in fact he died a free man in 2013.
No. It's called the Mandela effect. Because people have a memory of Joseph Mengele getting apprehended in Ohio in 1970. So it's the Mandela effect.
The Mandela effect has been an internet meme for almost a decade. It's always been called that.
See, you're having a Mandela effect about the Mandela effect.
So they like to bring this stuff up because there is truth to these things. Now, earlier on when this thing started, I didn't believe much of it. I thought it was more of a mismemory thing, and I still believe there's a lot of mismemory to it. But the mismemory, when people go, oh, it's not a mismemory, they're changing things. Well, we can look at what's going on with people's memories, spikes in a lot of diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, to radiation exposure. Because, and I'm not saying that that's what this is 100%, but I want to look at the correlation between the two because, again, when we have silent weapons for quiet wars, we can look no further than the cell phone. Now, the cell phone could be responsible for many of the horrible things going on in the world as far as people's thoughts, how people are being influenced, how we have this absolute army of mind-controlled zombies who believe the liberal media, who believe the communist media, I should say, who follow their false idols. And it's all because of the cell phone in their hand 24/7. They're getting drilled with propaganda around the clock. But what never is talked about is the effects of radiation. And I've studied and watched a lot of films and documentaries on the after effects of Hiroshima, which really, a lot of people, don't believe that there are nuclear bombs. Some people question Hiroshima, etc., which is perfectly fine. You should question anything we're taught because, again, everything is fake that they teach us. And even stuff they show us sometimes with our own eyes, like the moon landing, can be considered fake. But what isn't fake is the effects of radiation. So they have done experiments on people, which a lot of people also believe is what really happened at Hiroshima, was a mass experiment with radiation exposure. And then, of course, now we're seeing in our day-to-day lives, quietly they've integrated radiation into our everyday lives from microwaves all the way up to the point now where there's these huge towers on every street corner. What they don't tell you about is the effects, the harmful effects. The rise in cancer, the rise in Alzheimer's, the rise in all of these things that revolve not just around your brain, but around your immune system and your DNA. These are things that never are discussed because people can't see the actual frequencies coming out of their phones. And they've gotten people so obsessed with their technology that they would rather take the chance of getting cancer or something along those lines because it's something that they won't have to deal with in the immediate future, as in like today or tomorrow. So if they have to deal with it a year from now, they'll rather take the chance of doing that as long as they can have their phones, their games, and their all the other things, their apps on their phones around them 24/7. But over the years, they've quietly, even in the mainstream when the cell phones first came out, even mentioned things about radiation exposure with cell phones.
Today's Tech Bites blame the phone if your kid isn't doing well in school.
A Swiss study claims radiation from smartphones during phone calls leads to memory loss in teens.
Radiation from your mobile phone may affect your memory. When teens frequently held their smartphones to their ears, increasing their brain's exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, it had a significantly adverse effect on their visual memory.
And of course, quietly still to this day, we see things out there where they talk about studies finding mobile cell phone radiation affects memory performance in adolescence. Cancer is not the only health effect from cell phones documented in published literature. A study from the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute found 1 year of mobile phone linked to memory damage in teenagers, specifically the teens that used the phone against one side of their head, scored more poorly on tests that measured memory skills specific to the brain regions getting the highest exposure. Now, this study is from 2015. So what has happened since 2015? Well, they've told us that they've increased the speed of our internet. So, 2015, we're talking like 3G, borderline 4G. Now we're at 5G going on borderline 6G. So all it happens is then is no, you're not listening to things faster on the internet. No, you're not downloading faster. What's happening is the frequencies coming out of these machines and the radiation exposure, I should say, coming out of these machines, the radioactive frequencies coming out of these machines has increased. So it's increased on your body, it's increased on your mind. And of course, in 2020, when that whole big thing went down that everybody in the world was affected by, of course, there's a lot of measures in place to let you question and correlate that with 5G as well. So I think one of the things going on here is that we're seeing the mainstream media covering up for a lot of people misremembering, because when Mandela effect started, a lot of people were dismissing it, going, that's not real, that didn't really happen. You know, I remember it the right way as opposed to the way everybody else was remembering. A lot of people were stubborn, but more and more people are finding these little things going, wait a minute, I definitely remember that one. So if you took 1,000 of the things that people claim are Mandela effects, and there's more than that, you'll see people make arguments and say, well, I remember this one this way, so that one's definitely not off, but this one might be. I think that's affected every single one of us. One specifically, obviously, is the Bible talking about the lion lying down with the lamb. Now, I specifically always remember the Bible saying the lion will lie down or shall lie down with the lamb, and now, of course, everybody sees that it says the wolf shall lie with the lamb. So this is one of those cases where it affects me. I've always seen it and remembered it that way and never heard the other interpretation. With movies, I can look at those and say to myself, well, maybe I was just a little word, like a pluralization of a word, or changing the to it, or like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, versus if you build it, he will come. There's so many of these things, and they're actually giving attention to it. So when they start giving attention to it, they're doing that because they know that people are starting to research this. So because they're affected by it in their day-to-day life, which is something that they can't ignore. So they want things in place so that if you start referencing or looking these things up, they will not shut down YouTube channels that talk about the Mandela effect and things like that. But what they will do is try to shut down or silence anybody that's correlating any type of memory loss or any type of psychological or mental problems correlated to 5G. That's where we see it. So Forbes has the Mandela effect. A psychologist explains collective false memory. So let me read a little bit of this to you so you understand what they're trying to do here from a psychological standpoint. Nelson Mandela, renowned freedom fighter and an activist, spent 27 years in prison, a tale of resilience and hardship. Yet his compelling story is often distorted in collective memory, as many vividly recall Mandela's death in prison during the 1980s. In reality, Mandela lived a long and fruitful life. Post-incarceration, he went on to become president of South Africa from 94 to 99 and passed away in 2013 at 95. Despite these facts, many hold strongly to the belief that they remember Mandela had died in prison. This mind-boggling phenomenon, a massive collective belief in an event or fact that is not true, has been dubbed the Mandela effect. Interestingly, this phenomenon has been observed extensively in different contexts. Now, another thing to note that doesn't get brought up often enough is that when we always reference 1984, I've talked about 1984 a lot, right? They gave us 1984 to read even in school. So they wanted you to read it as a desensitizing programming method that they use, which is part of psychological ops. But in 1984, they also alternate history. So if you remember in 1984, they change the history books. They rewrite history. You know the expression, rewrite history? You can't rewrite history, just like you can't change the weather. Well, they do. So they have done that. They do go in and change things, which messes not just with your head psychologically, right? It changes history to fit whatever narrative and whatever direction they want to go as well. So they're constantly doing that, but history itself that we all know isn't real anyway. The majority of things they tell us happen, if not everything they tell us that has happened through the school system, is not real. You want to take mathematics and things like that from school or phys ed, be like, you can't fake that, that's fine. But you go through literature, the literature we're taught in English classes, you can go through history over and over again, beating a false history in your head. And that's where we end up and how we've ended up where we are. Okay. So going back to the Forbes article and the CNN articles, right? They're saying the Mandela effect describes the false memories many of us share, but why can't scientists explain it? So even these mainstream communist propaganda outlets are not hiding from the fact that people's memories have been altered, but they're saying, why are people's memories altered? So now they're trying to tell you why people's memories are altered. They're saying things like the Mandela effect's is a fascinating memory phenomenon where everyone seems to show incorrect memories for common popular icons, said neuroscientist Wilma Bainbridge, an assistant professor in the University of Chicago's Department of Psychology. It is really growing in popularity on the internet on sites like Reddit and TikTok, and it's not really a new thing. I mean, I talked about this in 2016. And again, when it first came out, they were bombarding a lot of stuff in the mainstream. So it made everybody skeptical about what it was really about. So I think a lot of us kind of pivoted on even discussing it because we were seeing where this was going. And I think now what we're seeing, because of the fact that the mainstream media and all these people are covering it, and they're covering it in a sense of saying, oh, okay, you're having memory problems. We're not going to sit here and act like there aren't suspicious things out there. We'll admit to suspicious things, and we're going to tell you why these are happening. Of course, the reason they tell you why is not true. Now, that's where you can go down a rabbit hole and you can start saying, well, what is really occurring? And a lot of people obviously believe that CERN are doing things with the big CERN Hadron Collider to alternate reality, right? Other people believe, well, maybe they've gone in and done things like 1984. But I think that one thing that always gets lost in this is the effects of radiation exposure on the brain. So they are causing people to have problems with memory loss via the cell phone and via these towers that continually pop up. Okay, in a recent video I was talking about, you drive down a highway, every mile on the side of the road, look. Because we become so desensitized, we don't even notice these towers now. I do, okay, because I cover this stuff, not just, I that's how my brain works now. I'm always awake when I'm out. I'm always looking. I see all, and I constantly think to myself, there are other people seeing it, and I know they're not. Because once you see one, once you see two, when they first came out, you become desensitized. Now they're everywhere. And people are too busy while they're driving, obviously focusing on the road. Hopefully, more people are focusing on their cell phones, texting while they're driving, which is probably the most dangerous thing going on in the world right now. If you've seen some of these drivers who 99% of the time are libs, because you can just look in the window as they're swerving in and out, and you think that they're on some type of a drug, but really they're just texting because they're irresponsible. But anyway, these towers are becoming more and more prominent. The more of these things that are popping up, the more problems people are beginning to have. Now, obviously, 5G doesn't just affect your memory and memory loss. Obviously, the radiation exposure is going to cause other things to your immune system and your genetics, which I can't go into here on YouTube because that's one of the things that they specifically will talk about giving you a strike for, because a lot of people have correlated, again, the thing that happened in 2020, everybody was locked up, with these towers popping up at the same time. So there's a lot of things going on that people aren't paying attention to. But when stories like this happen, not stories necessarily, but they can't control people in their day-to-day lives seeing these things and saying, I don't remember it that way. I don't remember it that way. I don't remember it that way. And then researching what it is. So they want these mechanisms in place to convince you that these neurological problems that you're having are normal. They want you to think that memory loss is normal and all these other things are normal. When in reality, yes, they could be alternating our perception and things that are going on. But they definitely don't want you to correlate with the dangers of 5G and how radiation can affect your memory, because that's a scientific fact that they can't even dispel. What they'll try to do is say, well, that's unproven that the 5G towers give off that kind of radiation exposure. Those are the types of things they try to throw at you to try to make you kind of just go, oh, okay. What do you mean scientists haven't? What do you mean the tests haven't been run? Why are all these things up then? Of course the tests have been run. They've seen the effects of radiation exposure, and that's why they use mottos like silent weapons for quiet wars or quiet weapons for silent wars. The war is on all of us. Okay, they've told us they want the population destroyed. They want the population decimated, but they aren't going to do it by rolling out tanks. They're going to do it through other means, and that's one of the means that they're using is our exposure to radiation. And people are like, well, aren't they exposed? Well, they obviously aren't exposed to it. Why? Because they take things so that they don't have radiation exposure. Why do you think they took things like NAC off the shelves? They used to give NAC to soldiers for radiation poisoning back in other wars, in other time periods. Now they took it off the shelves at the same time that all this other stuff occurred with the outbreak, because they want people to be exposed to radiation. They don't want anything that they could take to prevent them from being exposed to this. Now, on top of just that, I'm sure they take lots of actual potions in their body that make them immune to it and unaffected by it, okay? They're obviously never going to do these things to affect themselves. People always ask that question. They're like, well, if they're doing it, then they're doing it themselves. Well, obviously they know if they spray the skies and do these things that they're going to have to take certain medications to prevent their exposure to these things, and that's what they do. Okay, they're all in the know. What do you think they do with these secret meetings they go to? They think they're sitting there talking. They put the cameras on, like they're talking about climate and all this stuff. They're talking about more and more of the poisons they're going to put on us, and to make sure that they have this and that, and they're all probably getting their doses while they're there and getting their prescriptions while they're there to make sure that they're not affected by these things. So back to the topic. Again, the Berenstain Bears, those are some of the ones that they constantly talk about. And they want you fixated on these things and then going back in your head They love to do that too. They want you to go through, in your mind to try to remember what you remember it as and what it truly is. And you can start driving yourself crazy. And again, I'm not saying there's not truth to that, because there is. But they don't ever want you to get into things that are affecting our minds. Not the CERN types of things, but the things that are going on right in front of us that will affect your memory. There's a reason they've normalized. Okay, I've talked about autism, how autism's been normalized. And instead of going, why are people getting autism? They're just going, you could expect autism. And everyone's like, okay, my kid's got autism. Don't say anything. You'll hurt his feelings. And instead of going, well, why does your kid have it? Why are more and more people getting it? Right? They don't want you going that route. They want you to just go, oh, he's got autism. Accept it. Accept it. Instead of going, no, something's wrong. You're doing this to people to cause this to happen. You're causing people to be infertile, right? Well, the same thing is going on now with Alzheimer's and dementia. There is spikes and spikes and spikes in it, and they're telling us that it's normal. And people are just like, yeah, it's normal now. Well, why is it normal? Why is cancer so normal? Right? They want to normalize it, but they don't explain to you why it's happening. Oh, it just is. Oh, it just is, right? Well, the things that you can't see with your own eyes are what's causing it. The things you're exposing yourself to because you trust these people are selling you a phone because you're saying, well, everybody else is on it. Yeah, and everybody's getting sick. And everybody is having problems with their memory. And everybody's having problems with their mental health. And everybody's getting cancer. And everybody's developing brain tumors. Because this is what's going on. Think about things that have become, over the last 20 years, normalized that were never normalized and why people are getting sicker and sicker. And all one has to do is use common sense for 3 seconds and go, yeah, 20 years ago, people weren't on their phone 24/7. Now they are. People are sleeping with their phones next to their heads, and the frequencies are going right to their brains. So this is what we're dealing with, and nobody sees it and nobody says anything. And when they do start thinking about why things have changed and start researching the Mandela effect, they want to send their, and look, how do we trust television doctors? The fakest of the fake. What did they just tell us a couple years ago? They don't have to hold any or have any accountability for the lies they spew. So they want you to think, oh, well, here's a scientist for CNN. Oh, well, he might not be corrupt. Even if I thought they were corrupt for the other thing that went on, the outbreak, maybe here I can get some information from a neuroscientist. All of it is corrupt. These are fake doctors. These doctors and scientists have been plotting our demise and how they can get away with it silently. Because if they weren't doing it silently, the people would rise up and a revolution would start. And it's not just the mind control that's keeping them there. It's the frequencies and everything else that are dumbing them down, exhausting them, and making them sick. So I wanted to cover that because I saw that Forbes had this article on the Mandela effect. I saw that CNN recently had an article, BuzzFeed, and they go through all this stuff. They're like, here's the top 20 things about the Mandela effect. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Oscar Mayer versus Oscar Mayer with an M-A versus M-E. Right? The Berenstain Bears versus the Berenstain Bears. An A or an E. Shazam. I'm reading off of a list here of some of the ones. And then they want to explain to you about false memories. And they want to say, well, it's normal to have false memories because you might have heard it, a line repeated from someone else or repeated in a movie. Like they use Tommy Boy as one of these things. They try to say, well, Tommy Boy goes, Luke, I am your father. And then it's Luke, Luke, I am your father, right? So let me just explain that one. If you saw Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, you probably remember Darth Vader uttering the famous line, Luke, I am your father. You might be surprised to learn the line was actually, no, I am your father. So then they try to just go, hey, well, that's because Tommy Boy said, Luke, I am your father. And other movies have said, Luke, I am your father. But when you go watch the movie, it doesn't really say that. So everybody just kind of goes back and forth about what they really heard, what they didn't hear, instead of saying, what is going on as far as our minds go? Why are all these things increasing around us? Why are more and more people starting to think the Mandela effect is real? But why are more and more people and why are more and more mainstream media outlets covering it and nobody's mentioning anything with radiation and how radiation exposure affects your memory? Because it does. Radiation exposure affects your brain. And it doesn't just affect it from the standpoint of increasing your chances of getting tumors and Alzheimer's. It affects your current day-to-day memory. And people out there just dismiss that stuff. That's why they've normalized things like brain farts and, he's a blonde. I'm forgetful. They just normalize that stuff instead of saying, why am I forgetting things more and more? Why is my brain foggy more and more? Because you're under attack 24/7 from the exposure to radiation. And they're normalizing this with Mandela, but they're not normalizing it to bring any truth to the topic. They're normalizing it because they know that people out there are feeling effects with their memories and their minds. And when they research these things, they want to give you false information from false doctors and tell you why it's normal for you to have memory problems, why it's normal for you to have be diagnosed with Alzheimer's in your 20s and 30s, which is the next thing, which I have covered, where they are trying to tell you that, oh, more and more people are getting dementia in their 20s. And people are like, oh, wow, that's crazy. Is it crazy or is something going on? That's what people should be saying. Instead, they just go, it's crazy. They dismiss it and they go right back on their phone, which is causing all the problems in the first place, as well as those towers that are sitting right outside of our homes. We've allowed them to do this. That's what this comes down to. We've allowed them to use our bodies as if we're lab rats, and they're experimenting on us, and they're doing it out in the open, and they're keeping you distracted with absolute nonsense, and they're giving you things like upgrades on phones, and, oh, it's cheap to get a new phone. We'll give you a phone for free. Why do you think they're doing that? Because they care so much? Because I remember the last thing they were trying to give away for cheap, or I should say for free, and they were even giving you money if you went and got it. And everybody got suspicious of that. Well, be suspicious of the phone as well, and the towers as well. So I wanted to cover the topic. I haven't covered it in years. I'm interested to see what some of you think about it. Obviously, if you followed my channel from the beginning, when I first did cover it, I did say and think it was a psychological operation because of the fact it was getting so much traction in the mainstream. But over the years watching it, you see that what they do is they do bring it up because they have to bring it up because so many people will wake up to a lot of the things going on. So they want their answers in place about it. Now, I don't know if I necessarily believe the Mandela effect is CERN or if I necessarily believe it's 1984 or if it is full on 5G. But obviously there's a lot of things going on affecting all of our minds and our memories and our physical health that they're doing to us. Silent weapons for quiet wars. That's what we're in the middle of. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always and your families.